The beginning of this project actually started several years ago when the client started looking for properties, and he and I would go to the sites together to look at them to see what the potential was for realizing the vision that he had. He had a very specific vision on how he wanted to be living, where the environment that he wanted to be surrounded by, and so we looked at several properties before this, the site that he finally selected was the one chosen. So the formal process of design started with the land, and so I've been working with him since the beginning with the architect, figuring out how things need to be laid out, what the sizes of the windows need to be, what the orientation needs to be, to maximize the vision that the client has.
I liked it a lot because it's on a slope and it faces the lake. And so what do you do with it? Now, I have never built a building on a sloped lot, and I would recommend to anybody who watches this, don't do it. Just all the issues I had to deal with. But I wanted to get the view, so of course I wanted to make it somewhat simple to manage the cost and the complexity. So I decided to make it out of a kind of a box, rectangle box, and then go up as high as I could without, and staying within the regulation. So when I saw this land, again, you know, you have to have a vision because you get a view of the lake, which is amazing. Of course, to get really the most of it, you have to go up, which we did. And then, but then in the back, it's like wooded area, and you feel like you're in the middle of Adirondack. It's amazing, it's beautiful, very private, extremely private. You got a kind of a creek on one side, and then the front, of course, you got the lake view, so it's beautiful. But of course, with beautiful things comes with a price that you have to pay. So dealing with, of course, just the sloped land, etc. And that's one part of it where we decided to use big rocks to deal with the elevation change. These are massive rocks. They're called Seneca stone or riprap rocks, basically. They weigh anywhere from 1 to 3 ton, huge rocks. And they were coming from a quarry north of Cayuga Lake. I've been to that quarry probably 10 times. How to set those rocks? Like one of the walls is over 20 feet tall. These are some serious issues, how to manage that. And so the person who did a big part of that project was, name is Jim. Amazing job, a good machine operator, just understanding, doing it safely, which is very key, but making it work and making it that, again, that is very solid, because it could have been a major safety concern.
The original stone that came were about 2 foot across, height-wise. They were 3 by 3, 3.5 by 3, 3.5 by 4 square stone. So they were pretty good size. I would say those stones probably weighed in the neighborhood of 1,800 to a ton and a half. When we got building the bigger retaining wall in front of the house, we adjusted stone because we needed large stone for foundation to hold all that we brought. Now the stones came 5 and 6 foot width and lengthwise, and they were 28 inches thick, which made them a lot heavier. I moved stones that were over 7.5 foot in length and 5 foot wide and 28 inches tall. I'd say those stones probably weighed in the area of 6,500, 7,000 pounds. You would get a truckload that would have 40-some thousand pounds of stone on it, and there might be 5 stones on it. something like that if you were lucky. Well, I think the thing that most people don't understand about groundwork like that, particularly with heavy groundwork where you're picking up heavy loads and stuff, is the dangerous nature of it and the instability of handling heavy equipment on rough terrain with heavy loads. It looks like it's easy, but it is a crusher of a panic time and stress time to hold that stuff all the time, because you're on a very thin edge balancing something that has a great deal of weight and a whole lot of destructive power set right there that you're in the middle of.
But a lot of the challenges we had, I would say 80% of it was contributed towards being a slope lot. Just logistically, like these windows we use, they were so big, they were so heavy. How do you lift them up, to install them? Just dealing with some of the framing. How do you move some of the I-beam, because we used I-beam, how do you move them to the third floor that high, So you have to have a method, and being in a slope lot, it's got its own challenge. Did I use an architect for this project, and should I use one, and how did I use the architect with the project, basically? The answer is yes and no. So initially I went and got some estimate using an architect, really good architect, and the cost was very high. Typically an architect could change upward of 10% of the cost of the project. So I decided to do it on a more cost-effective side. And so I found an architect who did just a generic design of the building. Just to give you an idea, the cost of that, creating a set of drawing, was around $4,000, very cheap. Having said that, I paid a huge price later because of the changes we had to make, modification that was necessary.
So I think something to keep in mind if somebody's building a house that tends to get overlooked is bring your designer in early. A lot of people tend to hire an architect for a particular aesthetic, and that's as it should be. But again, some of the practicalness of actually living in a home and having it be, more than just a nice design, but actually a really magnificent living space for the family, that's where a good interior designer can help with that. And having your designer part of the conversation from the beginning, from the thought, the idea, just ensures that it ends up being what it is you really want, and in the end can actually save money because you're not having to redo things that didn't work well or weren't well thought out. And bringing a designer in early also helps keep the project flowing nicely, because we have experience that allows us to know some of the big stumbling blocks that are going to show up and anticipate things that might be problematic that can get addressed before they're problems, and there's a plan in place.
You want to make sure you got a big vision. You want to make sure you have a story behind the whole thing. And I would highly, highly recommend Linda. She's one of the most amazing people I work, very professional. One of the nice things I like about her, if she disagreed with something, she would tell you and she would not give up. So it didn't matter how much I jump up and down, and she said, nope, you're not gonna do it, because she knew it would be in the wrong path. And I trust her enough, knowing that if she really rejects an idea, that she has a point. You don't see the big picture till it's finished. So you need a set of eyes who can envision what this place is gonna look like. And she has that. Decisions like the tiling, the orientation of the tile. So okay, you picked up the tile, but these are rectangles. Do you put it this way or put it the other way. I give you a good example that had a huge impact. Originally, I wanted to do a stucco for the exterior because it's a more contemporary type approach. This is for the siding. And when I start trying to get a quote for the stucco, for the siding, I couldn't get a good quote, and there weren't many contractors to do a stucco in this area. So we had to come up with an alternative very quickly. So we went with this other type of siding called hardy board, which is very good, still, very high end, and they last for a long time. But the question is, how do you make the design that is more contemporary? So she came up with an idea that you can see it from the outside, that it's yet very simple, but yet give it that contemporary look.
There is a lot of outside living space because this is a site that really, when the weather's decent, you're going to want to be out on. We have the wonderful, lovely first floor patio that you can go out and just sit and enjoy the views of the lake. The main floor of the house, actually in this house, the bedrooms are on the first floor. The main living area is on the second floor to maximize enjoyment of the view during waking hours. And then you go up to the third floor, and that has a beautiful deck. The house is surrounded with decks where there aren't patios, and the back of the house is a great place with the fire pit and outdoor kitchen, and with the woods and the creek running through. It's really a lovely place. I think when we think about the style of the furnishings inside, just the general style aesthetic inside, I kind of think of like Miami penthouse, but like uber sophisticated, not sort of the remnants of disco, but just very sleek and clean and light, and things are low, organic, but really comfortable and with really nice finishes as well.
So many decisions have to be made by the craftsman on the job because there were no details on the drawings, and the decision had to be made. How do you solve that? So originally, when the building was designed, the main entrance was the first floor where the bedrooms are. And during the construction, it was like, that doesn't make sense. You don't want your main entrance when you have guests coming in where your bedrooms are. So we wanted the main entrance now to come to the second floor. So we had to work out the steps, a landing area. And my goodness, there were like 10 different ways of solving that problem. And each way, when you look at it, you're like, it just doesn't make sense. It just didn't feel good. It's one of those things, if it's done right, you're like, oh, that looks beautiful. But if it's done wrong, and once it's done, which is you can't just change it, you're like, oh, we should have done it differently. And this is a craftsman, his name is Wes, the guy who did all the framing, amazing guy. So he came up the way he put the steps and the landing area to come up to the second floor. Extremely happy. I got so many compliments. Again, somebody who is craftsman, somebody who can look at it and they can visualize.
Well, the biggest part was the stairs themselves because of the distance. And originally, the stairs were supposed to come off the front, right about where we're standing right here. And they would have ended up, because as you go down, the ground goes further. So the stairs would have been, 30 feet long. So we ended up putting them where they are now because it solved the issue of the grade in the front. And we had issues with clearance and windows, and we just kept playing around with it until we came up with something that worked. A lot of the other challenges were the outside of the house was pretty much set and designed, but the inside changed, and it was almost like an as-built. We're constantly moving walls, moving things, changing things because of stuff that wasn't anticipated and really well thought out. The outside seemed like it had a lot of thought given to it, windows and how it wants to look on the outside, and that stood true and looks good. But the inside was a bit challenging, not so much the top 2 floors, but the first floor. Just trying to make the plumbing and air conditioning work, because no one, when they design stuff, sometimes they don't think about the infrastructure and where are you going to run ducts, for example. There was no walls that went top to bottom, and there's windows everywhere, so you couldn't use outside walls to do anything with. And even behind me, in the middle of the building, the framework is so wide you can't get stuff through a foot worth of 2x6s that are stacked side by side.
And there were literally hundreds, if not thousands, of decisions you have to make. You know, every day, every week, every month. This project almost lasted truly from the beginning, about a year and a half in terms of the schedule wise. But then you start framing the building. What kind of a foundation do you put? Do you put poured concrete? Do you use blocks? Do you use ICF blocks? There's so many options that as a general contractor, you have to make those decisions. Then you start, okay, you're framing it, you've made those decisions, you're feeling good about yourself. Then, okay, insulation. What kind of insulation do you put? So this is a good one. Whenever I've seen buildings, they use these fiberglass insulation. You know, you tuck it in, then you sheet rock it, etc. But then there's a newer technology that are used more often are these blown insulation. Basically, they come in and just use these machines. It's like a chemical reaction. But then I started reading that some people have used that and things gone really bad and actually destroys your house. So I started doing some research, reading it on the internet, and it was like, yeah, it's real. This is not some hypothetical, because the chemical reaction, it has to be done right. The temperature has to be done correctly, and you have to use a contractor. They know what they're doing, the right day, right temperature. So that was a big factor, you know, how to do that. Another question comes in, what kind of a heating do you put into the house? Now you can use forced air, much cheaper. There's nothing wrong with it. But then I had heard that radiant heat is amazing, especially in the winter, when the heat is in the floor and it comes up. But there are many, many issues like that come up all the time when you're building a custom building, a custom house. There are decisions have to be made by craftsmen that are key with the final product. And I think people who worked on this project, they would ask me, well, how would you like to do this? And my response always was, what would you do if this was your house? And you know, I had a very good relationship with everybody. And I said, what would you do? How would you do it if it's your house? You're building your own house. And it's amazing the solution they can come up with, and it works. So what advice would I give somebody who wants to build a house, you know, considering, I guess, the complexity? First and foremost, I would say you got to start with a good set of drawings, no question about it. So I would say that's the first thing. Second, make sure you have the stomach to deal with the project, especially if you're not a contractor, you don't build houses every day. So you have to have the stomach. Third is you have to make sure you have the cash flow and the budget, because I would say most of the time it goes way above what you had anticipated the cost going to be. And once you start, you know, you're in it. You can't just, you know, turn around and say, oh, I quit, because you lose so much money. So you got to get into the final part and finish the project. And don't be afraid to make mistakes, because often when you get a contractor to build a house for you, a turnkey, they make mistakes too, but they won't tell you everything. So I guess when you a general contractor yourself, you make the mistakes yourself. So that's the way I looked at it. I mean, we made mistakes, and building this. Overall, I'm very happy with the final product. Overall, I'm very satisfied. Did we make mistakes? My goodness, yes. Do I regret of the whole project? Not at all. Very happy. Looking back and thinking all the headache that I went through, you feel satisfied. I mean, at the end of the day, we are human. We live once. You want to look back. It's like, what did I accomplish? So I feel good about it. I feel good about the project. It was a complicated project, but getting it to the finish line and overall made pretty good decisions. And I had an excellent team of people working. So I'm very happy. You feel, it's a feeling of accomplishment.